Perfectly good tomatoes are being plowed over instead of picked. It's a sad scene happening in South Florida.
You can't even afford to pick them right now between the cost of the labor and the inputs that go in.
Have you ever thought that as long as there's land water and sunshine, American farming could never die? Then take a hard look at these 10 crops, left to rot in the fields right at harvest time. Not because farmers are lazy, but because they've run out of reasons to keep going. Dumped milk. That's old news. But truckloads of potatoes being tossed into landfills, corn selling for half its value with no takers, soybeans ripening bright across the plains, yet not a single international buyer in sight. Fertilizer prices have doubled. Labor is scarce. Tariffs keep stacking up. And every morning, American farmers wake up facing one terrifying question. Am I planting a harvest or planting my own bankruptcy? What was once the pride of America, its mighty, tireless agriculture, has now become a financial burden, crushing the very people who built it. These are the 10 crops that were once symbols of abundance, but have now turned into silent death sentences hanging over American farms. Tomatoes. By mid-June, as tomato fields across Central California began to flush red, the usual excitement was nowhere to be found. Instead, silence. Entire acres heavy with ripe fruit, and no one bothering to harvest. Not because they're late, but because there's no reason to pick anymore. Tomatoes were once a point of pride, a symbol of homegrown strength. From Florida to Texas, Georgia to California, almost every farmer had once put their faith in this crop. But now growing tomatoes feels like gambling in a market where the rules have vanished. Fertilizer costs are up 11% compared to last year. Harvest workers are in short supply thanks to tighter immigration crackdowns. Meanwhile, wholesale prices from processing plants have plummeted. Some farmers are selling literal tons of tomatoes and still not making enough to fill a tractor's gas tank. Worse yet, contracts with processors are being canceled halfway through. The excuse market demand has dropped. But everyone knows what that really means, an excuse to drive down prices. As political tensions cause international buyers to shy away from American products, crates of ketchup, tomato paste, and sauce are sitting in storage unsold. Inventories swell, orders freeze, and once again it's the farmer who pays the price. This harvest. It's becoming nothing more than a silent debt with two choices: rip out the plants, or leave the fruit to rot. Somewhere someone cried, not over the labor lost, but from not knowing why they're even farming anymore. At local farmers markets across the country, American tomatoes are quietly disappearing. In their place, cheap imports shipped thousands of miles, but somehow still cheaper than the tomatoes grown just down the road. What used to be a proud mantra, grow local, eat local, is now just faded signage in supermarket aisles. Farmers, once hailed as stewards of the land and the nation's food supply, now feel like outsiders in their own industry. And when even a ripe red tomato becomes a burden, it's hard not to wonder if faith in farming has already rotted on the vine. Because if the small vegetable fields can't survive this economy, what hope is left for the massive crops covering tens of thousands of acres? Wheat. Wheat used to be the farmer's quiet promise, the crop you didn't have to overthink. Come planting season, just sow. Eventually there would be bread on the table, breakfast would be covered, and money would flow back into the wallet. But that promise no longer holds. Today, wheat is a test of patience and a stress test for every financial nerve. In 2025, the price of wheat has dropped below the cost of production, turning a harvest into a mental endurance trial. Farmers no longer ask, how much profit will I make this year? They ask, how little can I afford to lose? And when the math changes like that, it's a red flag, not just for one farm, but for an entire industry on the edge. Across what was once called the breadbasket of America, Kansas, Oklahoma, even parts of North Dakota fields are lying fallow untouched. Not because of drought or lack of seed or failing machinery, but because nobody wants to gamble money on a crop that the market has already turned its back on. Some families, after 3 generations of wheat farming, are making the unthinkable decision to pause planting for the first time in 40 years. Fields heavy with grain are no longer a source of pride, they're a burden. Stockpiles grow, purchase contracts are delayed or slashed to prices barely enough to cover fertilizer. Some farmers have started selling the moment the crop is harvested just to avoid storage costs, even if it means watching their already thin profit margins vanish entirely. And the cruel irony, there's no drop in production. America is still planting, still harvesting, but we're feeding a system that no longer feeds us back. Wheat prices are collapsing because the world has shifted toward cheaper, more politically stable sources. Meanwhile, US farmers are paying more than ever for diesel, land taxes, labor, and a dozen hidden fees nobody talks about. They're caught between two blades, rising costs and crashing prices. A wheat farmer in Nebraska once said, "We're growing the food we can't even afford to eat, not if we had to live off what we make from the harvest." That's not poetry. That's the everyday reality across thousands of farming towns in America. So ask yourself this: if even wheat, the most stable, traditional, essential crop, is being abandoned by the very people who've grown it their whole lives, what chance do the riskier crops have? The ones that rely on volatile weather, tight labor windows, and fragile global demand. The answer is brutal, and it's coming fast. Soybeans. You plant millions of soybean seeds, watch your fields glow gold under the sun, and just when it's time to harvest, the buyer shows up with a forced smile and a canceled contract. They leave you holding a clipboard full of losses. No one's asking about the weather anymore. There's only one question left. At what price can I still afford to cover fuel and land payments? Over the past few years, soybean prices have been in free fall. Fertilizer, pesticides, machinery, rentals, labor up by 30 to 50%. But the sale price, up by maybe a few cents per pound. Planting soybeans now feels like fronting an entire operating budget, only to get handed a coupon with no expiration date. Those once reliable export contracts slamming shut. Shipments are delayed, canceled, or returned without explanation. A grower in Illinois watches the trucks turn around one after another, not because the crop is gone, but because there's no one left to buy it. Soybean crushing facilities have slashed output by up to 40% this season. Millions of bushels sit untouched in grain bins. Nobody's pulling them out. No demand. Packing plants and shipping hubs sit eerily quiet. The conveyor belts have stopped, just like the hopes of the farmers who once depended on them. Soybeans used to be a dual pillar crop used for both cooking oil and livestock feed. Now it's labeled a heavy core liability. Farmers aren't planting to profit anymore. They're planting just to keep their land leases to stay in compliance to avoid forfeiting contracts. It's no longer agriculture, it's paperwork. Worse still, many are realizing that doing nothing might have lost them less. Fertilizer, diesel, labor costs piled up just to service debt. And the season ahead, more of the same. What's terrifying isn't the losses themselves, it's the erosion of hope. When even the most stable crop becomes a financial trap, the whole system starts to rattle. Growers, processors, storage credit chains, all under pressure. Older soybean farmers, men in their 60s and 70s, are watching their kids leave the land not to chase dreams, but to escape an industry that no longer rewards hard work. One man who once boasted this crop feeds the whole region now says, "We're dragging weights around our ankles, and we don't even get to stop walking." And if soybeans, once described as green gold behind every barn door, now make farmers feel more like debt scavengers than food producers, just wait until you hear what's coming next. Don't expect it to be any better. Corn. You can still see miles of cornfields stretching along the highways of the Midwest. From a distance, it looks like prosperity. But step closer and the truth hits. Hard farmers are waking up each morning to harvest losses. Corn isn't green gold anymore. It's a generational burden passed down like a family secret, just to keep the bank from taking the land. The problem isn't yield. This year, the harvest is record-breaking, and that's not good news, it's a disaster. Oversupply, no buyers' prices, and free fall. Farmers are being forced to sell corn below the cost of planting it, and every harvest day feels like bleeding out. One farm ran the numbers. Harvesting this year's corn would leave them $14,000 in the red, but they're doing it anyway because walking away would be even worse. Input costs are a black hole. Fertilizer, pesticides, diesel, labor, all up. Diesel isn't $3 a gallon anymore, it's past $5. A ton of DAP fertilizer is pushing $900 and still rising. Farmers are now choosing between skipping fertilizer or taking on high-interest loans. Both paths lead to the same place, a mountain of debt. Exports frozen. Countries that once relied on American corn have moved on to cheaper sources. Port traffic is down. Processing plants are running short hours. The entire agricultural value chain is shrinking one link at a time. And the eye of the storm is always the person who plants the seed. Farmers are pretending everything's fine for their spouses, their neighbors, their bankers. But inside their operations are pressure cookers on the verge of blowing. They know next year might not come, but they can't walk away because they're not just growing corn, their entire lives are rooted in it. And worse, they're starting to realize they're trapped in a game with no way to win. And then they look south toward another crop, once the proud symbol of American agriculture now dying not from pests or weather, but because the system itself has stripped away its very reason to exist. Cotton. Cotton was once the shield that protected southern agriculture. Not just a crop, but a thread that wove the American dream across vast white fields. Today, every bloom feels more like a sigh, because what farmers are harvesting now isn't fabric, it's financial loss, staggering and relentless. Global cotton prices have fallen so low that many growers see no point in turning on the harvesters. Fields are left to dry in the sun, not out of laziness, but out of cold economics. The cost to harvest outweighs what the crop can fetch. A single pound of cotton today can't even cover the wage of the worker who picks it. Textile mills have turned to cheaper foreign imports countries, where labor is cheaper, environmental standards looser, and trade protections nearly non-existent. American cotton isn't losing because of poor quality, it's losing because the very rules of doing business in America have become a competitive burden. And who pays the price? The farmer. Thousands of dollars are poured into every acre with the hope of earning just a fraction back. But what comes in return? Fertilizer bills through the roof. Fuel costs exploding. A market that no longer shows loyalty. Even American fashion brands are ordering cotton from Bangladesh instead of coming back to the South, as if to say, sentiment doesn't make a profit, and what doesn't profit is forgotten. Small towns in Texas and Mississippi still run on cotton, but when that crop can't hold the line, the dominoes start falling. Gyms shut down, diners go quiet, school budgets shrink, and farm equipment is listed for sale, not to upgrade, but just to survive. The scariest part, no one knows where this stops. If a crop that survived Civil War oil crises and the 2008 recession is now collapsing, what hope is left for the lesser-known crops, the ones with fewer headlines, fewer safety nets, but still the lifeblood of entire counties? Sorghum. They once called sorghum the survival crop, the one that could weather dry land, scorching winds, and tight budgets. But now this supposedly low-maintenance crop is driving American farmers into one of the worst binds of the past 2 decades. Not because it won't grow, but because in today's market, growing it doesn't matter. Exports have collapsed. Grain silos in Kansas, Texas, and Colorado are packed to the brim, not because of bumper harvests, but because no one's buying. Long-term contracts that used to bring in millions have been canceled overnight, no negotiations needed. And in this brutal picture, farmers are no longer the backbone, they're being pushed to the sidelines, treated like dispensable cogs in a value chain that's falling apart. Right now, sorghum is selling for around $4 a bushel, less than it costs to plant it. But here's the cruel twist farmers still have to sow. If they don't, the bank pulls their land lease. If they stop producing, they lose access to next season's operating loans. So they keep pouring in money effort and hope into a crop that offers no guarantee, not of profit, not even of survival. Domestic demand has ticked up slightly, but just enough to support a sliver of the system. The rest containers sitting sealed, freight trucks canceled, fields of green where every square foot is a square foot of debt. Some farmers walk away, sell the equipment parcel, out the land salvage what little they can, but most don't have that option. They're stuck living off the most fragile commodity of all, hope. Americans love to picture their farmers as symbols of grit and endurance, but when the government can't step in fast enough and international buyers turn their backs, all that resilience only means one thing: deeper exploitation. No subsidies, no price floors, no stable buyers. Sorghum has become the emblem of an agricultural system quietly abandoned by the very institutions that once swore to protect it. And when even the most drought-tolerant, budget-friendly, low-risk crop isn't worth planting anymore, you have to ask how many harvests are left before the farmers planting more delicate, more expensive, more import-dependent crops are forced to walk away for good. Rice. Rice has always been seen as one of America's most stable crops, but now that very stability feels like a millstone chained to the farmer's ankle in a rising tide. No one's growing rice to prosper anymore. They're growing it to survive, to keep their land, to avoid foreclosure, to keep the bank from locking the gates on fields that once fed the nation. Storage silos in Arkansas and California are packed to capacity, not because rice is flying off the shelves, but because no one's buying. International demand has dried up. Domestic prices have plummeted. Farmers are sitting on mountains of grain, while buyers wait in silence, almost like they're watching to see who will collapse first. The cost of growing rice per acre is now at its highest in decades. Fertilizer, labor, fuel, crop insurance. Yet the market price keeps sliding downhill. Some farmers are selling entire harvests and still don't make enough to cover the cost of the harvester rental. That's not agriculture. That's a blood sport, and the farmer is the only one who doesn't get to walk away. In the Heartland's rice belts, seasoned growers are for the first time thinking about walking away from the crop. Not because they've stopped loving it, but because they can't afford to love it anymore. They're scratching out numbers, slashing every cost they can, asking the same brutal question. Should we even plant next year? When all we've done this year is bleed. Worse still, the very thing that used to be a point of pride, surplus rice, has now become a curse. A bumper crop is no longer a blessing. It's a death sentence. The harder they work, the deeper they sink. The more they harvest, the more they lose. So what happens when even a staple like rice, something as essential as bread on the table, no longer guarantees a living? What happens to the luxury crops, the export-driven ones, when foreign buyers start turning away? Pecans. In rural corners of America, pecan trees were once called a farmer's savings account, but today they've become a debt nobody wants to speak of. Towering trees that once stretched toward the sky as symbols of stability now cast shadows over cracked soil, silent reminders that you can work a lifetime and still lose everything. In the past, in-shell pecans brought in enough money to cover an entire harvest, pay college tuition, and keep the farm humming. But today, even with top-tier quality, the buyers are disappearing. Key markets Mexico and much of Asia have slashed orders without warning. Even domestic retailers are cutting costs, shifting to cheaper imports. The once proud American pecan has suddenly become too expensive to be worth choosing. In major growing states like Georgia and Texas, warehouses are full of containers that can't be shipped. Farmers are paying out of pocket to run irrigation and cold storage just to keep their harvest from rotting into waste. But for how long and who's coming to buy? Here's the cruel part: the better care you give your trees, the more you lose. Not because you failed, but because the system around you stopped protecting you. Taxes, insurance premiums, labor costs, all going up. Meanwhile, the money coming in, shrinking by the season. Some growers have had no choice but to leave their orchards untouched, letting the trees stand like monuments to a past that no longer pays. But this isn't just a financial crisis. It's a matter of pride. Families who've nurtured pecans across 3 or 4 generations are watching that legacy collapse under its own weight. They can't afford to keep farming, but they can't walk away either. And that's the true tragedy when you keep planting not out of hope, but just to avoid eviction from the land you've given your life to. No options left. Just the fading hope that anything will change. At least pecans still carry the air of luxury, the flavor of something worth waiting for. But the next crop? It's not a symbol. It's not a legacy. It's a filler product propped up by subsidies, abandoned by the market, and carrying a price no one wants to keep paying. Alternative crops. Think alternative crops are the lifeline for American farmers. Think again. The very crops once hailed as golden opportunities for crop rotation are slowly revealing themselves as nothing more than well-packaged traps. According to USDA reports, the acreage planted with alternative food crops like soy alternatives, quinoa, and lesser-known grains rose by a modest 8% in 2025, reaching over 3.5 million acres. But that's exactly where the trouble began. Yields may have gone up, but prices haven't kept pace. Quinoa, for example, now averages just $5 per pound, a 25% drop from 2024. The result, a fire sale. Farmers are offloading their harvest in desperation just to avoid losing their entire fields, and the dream of building a sustainable value chain is slipping away fast. The investment needed for these crops, new cultivation technology, imported seeds, processing infrastructure is well beyond the reach of most ordinary farm budgets. And once the crops mature, farmers are faced with a brutal reality. The domestic market remains skeptical, and exports are tangled in layers of global standards and red tape. It's a major obstacle for any fledgling industry hoping to tap into premium markets. A Montana farmer who tried growing quinoa put it bluntly, "I used to think I was pioneering a new market. Now I'm just keeping the field going so I don't break my lease on the equipment." That's the harsh truth. These alternative crops didn't replace anything. They just turned farms into test labs for failed experiments. Farmers jumped in, invested everything, and ended up with empty fields, debt-heavy books, and foreclosure letters instead of profits. The pain isn't just from picking the wrong crop. It's from being encouraged by the system to try only to be abandoned the moment things went south. It's like being shoved off a cliff and then watching the rescue ladder get pulled up behind you. So if a crop designed to save American farming is now quietly destroying it, what happens when the next crop on the list depends entirely on foreign subsidies and a fragile global supply chain? That solution might just be the seed of the next collapse. Sugarcane. In America's traditional sugarcane regions, Florida, Louisiana, Texas, this crop was once called the green lifeline, a steady source of income passed down through generations. But now even that supposed stability is dissolving like a spoonful of sugar vanishing in hot tea. The USDA just reported that U.S. sugarcane production for the 2024-25 season is estimated at 1.75 million tons, a 6% drop from the previous year. Planted acreage has fallen to its lowest in over a decade, as farmers abandon cane for less risky options like soybeans or corn. But even after sacrificing sugarcane, many farms are still on the brink. Raw sugar prices are hovering around 13.5 cents per pound, down 15% year over year. At that level, profits can't even cover harvest costs, let alone machinery and labor. In Florida, once the powerhouse of sugar supply for the Southeast sugar stockpiles have risen nearly 20%, not because of booming sales, but because there's no market. Farmers aren't just worried about prices anymore. They're watching cheap sugar flood in from Brazil and India, entering U.S. markets with little concern for the damage done to small domestic farms. The cost of producing each acre of cane has risen by 5 to 8% due to fertilizer spikes and higher fuel costs. So even if they harvest every last stalk, they're still bleeding money into a hole they can't patch. At the factory level, many sugar mills have cut their operating seasons from 8 months to just 5, a shortened harvest cycle, they call it. With low output and rising costs, the pie is shrinking and farmers are left fighting over crumbs. Some workers are laid off, others rotate shifts. A growing number of families are giving up altogether, selling off their once sugar-exclusive land and shifting to small-scale livestock or seasonal vegetables. Sugarcane isn't an easy crop, but for decades it had protection price controls, import quotas, subsidies. Those safety nets are now fading, replaced by a ruthless global market. And with no real shield left, cane growers are bearing a burden they can no longer carry. Worse yet, when you walk past family cane fields, plots that once thrived under generations of care, you'll see abandoned irrigation lines, rusting harvesters in idle yards, and farmers staring across land they've nurtured for decades, with nothing left but silence. This isn't about harvesting anymore, it's about whether sugarcane is even worth planting. When a farmer no longer believes in the crop, only in the idea of not losing everything that's not agriculture, it's war without a weapon. And if even a politically backed, strategically protected crop, once a pillar of American agriculture, can be pushed to the edge of extinction, then it's time to talk about crop duster 9, the one no one really talks about, but which survives almost entirely on government aid just to stay in the ground. America's farmers are running out of options. They plant in fear, harvest in doubt, and reap losses season after season. When even the core crops that once fed an entire nation are no longer worth growing, we must ask what lies ahead. If the fields, once the final refuge of honest labor and hope, are being strangled, then what is left for those who built this country with their hands? This video does not promote division or advocate for secession. All content is presented with the purpose of exploration, analysis, and sparking discussion, based on real-world events, public sentiment, and current social trends. We respect the U.S. Constitution and all federal regulations. If you found this video valuable, please consider liking, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell so you won't miss the next story that mainstream media often chooses not to tell. Our analyses are based on current data and independent viewpoints. They are not meant to predict the future with certainty or to mislead. We simply hope this information empowers our community to reflect and to act before it's too late.